Thank you, Jess. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Emily, for bringing us into this space this morning. I would like to welcome you all to the Early Learning Advisory Council special meeting. This is a report development meeting. Today is September 12th. If you weren't aware of that, then you might want to check your calendar. Please remember to mute your phone, and throughout the webinar, if you do have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat. We will also have some Q&A portions dedicated throughout the meetings. So as questions do arise, please find the appropriate time and to be able to ask that, and we will make sure that we get answers to that. And then, of course, if you have any technical difficulties, please send us an email and hopefully Jess will get that, or you're welcome to ping either Emily, Morgan, or myself or Jess, and we can hopefully assist from there. And we are going to start today, before we dive into the report development of the Fair Start for Kids Act ELAC recommendation report. We would like to get to know you all. So if you could take a few minutes and share in the chat your name, where you're located, and your role.
I also see in the chat that ask for the current list of the ELAC membership. Yes, we definitely do have a roster somewhere. We can look for it during this meeting and enter it in the chat if I'm able to find it. If not, we'll make a note to send it out with the follow-up email. If it's not on the webpage, it may be on the webpage, but I'll look around for you in a minute.
Good morning, Nancy. Welcome, Mary. I hope Bremerton is treating you well. Hi, Lois. Always a pleasure. Good morning, Milan. Welcome. Good morning to the Child Care Action Council. We are very glad you're here. And Colleen, welcome.
I did find the membership roster is on ELAC's webpage, so I dropped the link. Oh, Aaron did too.
Good, yeah. Thanks, Aaron. And good morning, Samantha. Nice to see a few of you from the eastern side of the state. Hi, Danielle. Welcome. Jen, love that town. There's two Richland hometown people on staff here. Hi, Deborah. Welcome. Great turnout. This is fantastic. Hi, Shatera. I hope I said that right. Welcome, Heidi. Welcome, Irma. Debbie, always a pleasure. Good deal, I got it right.
Welcome, everyone. I think, Jessica, if you want to go ahead and drop the screen share. So how today is going to go, we have Nicole Rose from Early Learning joining us from 10 to 11. But basically, we're just going to be working on Jamboards today, going through the list to date of developed recommendations and hoping that you guys can provide some more clarity and answer any questions that either my team or Early Learning has, so we can get the report to the next step. There are about 35 recommendations, I think, so it might be a little bit of a long morning. We'll try to take a break when it feels like a good time, but also please feel free to just take care of yourself as needed and take breaks. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so our first Jamboard is investing in childcare and early learning, and I will drop the link to that in the chat. Oh, thank you, Jessica. So Jessica dropped the link to the Jamboard in the chat. while we're going through these, we'll be taking notes, but feel free to make sticky notes on the recommendations as we go through them as well, if there's anything additional you want to add. What we're looking for is more clarity and specifics on the recommendation. So if anything comes to mind when you see the recommendation, you're like, oh, this is, I think, how we can accomplish that. Please let us know, raise your hand, or add it to the sticky note. We're also looking for more of kind of the stories and the why for why this recommendation would help childcare providers and families across the state. So if you see a recommendation, you're like, oh, I have a personal story or a reason why this is really impactful and why this would really help the early learning field in Washington, please also add that. So like I said, we have about 35 recommendations to get through, 4 different Jamboards. So we'll just go ahead and jump in on the first one. And the color of the sticky notes doesn't really mean anything, except for green is supposed to mean the recommendation looks like it might be directed to DCYF instead of the legislator. So we can chat about how to either adjust that so it is a recommendation to the legislator, or if it really is a recommendation for DCYF, what's a better format? Like, do we want to have 2, a list of recommendations that are just for DCYF, and then we'll have the report for recommendations to the legislator. Okay, so our first recommendation for investing in childcare and early learning is create more contracted slots to secure access for children with behavioral health needs. And then a couple questions. Is this a recommendation for DCYF or the legislator and the legislator? Would it require funding? Are there DCYF contracted slots currently? Does that bring anything up for anyone? Any responses to those questions? This is also one we can come back to when Nicole's here, if it might be a benefit to have some early learning experts in the room, or DCYF early learning experts in the room. You are all early learning experts. Okay, I'll pause for now. We can come back to this one with Nicole. One thing to keep in mind is, I see there's already some whys. Okay, let's go jump to this one then. Increase support for early learning centers to address behavioral issues. And then we're hoping we can get a definition of supports, what kind of supports would be helpful. And I also, behavioral issues was an edit. It had originally said special needs, and I'm not sure if you all remember at an ELAC or at a report development session earlier this summer, we talked a lot about how you all want to avoid euphemisms, and that special needs is a euphemism. And so I want to check in on this language here. Is behavioral issues what we're trying to get at? Is there something else? Just want to make sure that this language accurately reflects the recommendation you guys want to make.
A quick question. When you say euphemism, I'm a little confused because special needs is a category of kids, and there's federal legislation. I'm not an expert in this, but I just know that there are organizations in our community that focus on kids with special needs, and then there are different funding streams that support kids with special needs. So it's not, I don't know what I just want a little clarity about what people meant by euphemism, if anybody here helps to know that.
Just checking to see if anyone unmutes. I can kind of share what I remember from that meeting, but if anyone else was at that meeting that also has input, and if you guys disagree, I mean, it's also, if you think special needs really is the best word to use here, we can change that back.
I honestly think it's both. I think that from what I hear with childcare center directors and family home owners is that, and ECAP providers, is that there are a lot of kids with behavioral issues that need additional support in the classroom. And I think I've also heard a lot that the children with special needs aren't being served as well, and that there aren't in a lot of places there aren't the pull-in services, the pull-out services that would really help kids with special needs. And I don't know that much about it, so if anybody else has more background on that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also behavioral issues are not necessarily always special needs. So behavioral issues can be based on environmental. There are many things that behavioral issues can be based on, and the supports to understand how to work with children or how to set up a behavioral plan versus how to refer a child, because there may be more than that going on. So I think, yeah.
We have a couple hands raised. It looks like Lois, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Eric. I was going to say that I believe that Enrica and some of those that are immersed in this work had said that those should be set up separately. So I think it's more so a increased support for early learning centers to address behavioral issues and students with special needs. It should be both.
Mary Rose.
I was a special education school social worker for the past few years, and then I provide infant early childhood mental health consultation to the Makah tribe, Early Head Start and Head Start. And so when I'm looking at this with the behavioral issues and students with special needs, I don't think they can be like pulled apart necessarily, because a lot of the time there's a lot of interconnection between those things. And I think if we do separate it out, then we end up siloing the supports, where you have supports for behaviors and supports with special needs, and they don't work together as much as they need to. What I really have seen for the past few years is that we don't always include, we just don't have a lot of mental health support in general for like of any age, but especially with like mental health consultation and that includes supporting behaviors, and that the mental health consultants are not necessarily coordinating with early intervention providers who are there supporting the special needs. So I would love to see those like really explicitly tied together and working together. And I also wanted to mention really quick to all of you, because the early intervention would be, yes, I would love that. I wanted to mention really quick, I was just up in Nia Bay yesterday, and they have not had responses to requests for evaluations for IFSPs since COVID started. And they had one person come out one time, and so I'm wondering if DCYF does audits, or if there's any like way to make sure that that stuff is reaching like the rural and remote populations, and specifically like tribal populations. So that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, Mary Rose, we can definitely elevate that and connect with you after to see who can follow up on that piece. I just want to check real quick. Did I capture this right? Mental health consultants should coordinate with early intervention. That's a support.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And then we more of them. Sorry.
more mental health consultants or
yes.
more early. Okay.
Both.
Okay. Thanks. Debbie.
Hi. Hi, good morning. I just wanted to say I think I got really focused on increasing support, but what those supports might be. And I mean, I think that I would agree with everything that people are talking about, but I also think that right now we are serving children that have need support for behavioral issues. We're also, children that have special needs of some kind in programs. But what we don't have is we don't have staff who are have the training and support on a day-to-day basis in the classroom. And it is really hard to hire people and retain them when they don't have the skills and the knowledge to be able to navigate what happens in those classrooms and to be able to respond appropriately. In addition to more resources in general, I mean, if we don't fundamentally change the way staff is, the amount of money that providers receive and the amount of training that they have, and I just don't know how, bringing more people in the classroom is helpful, but they're there all day long, working with those kids in those programs, and something has to change about the compensation and the training that's available to people who are in the classroom, as well as partnering with other people with specialized skills. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. There's definitely a recommendation further on about a compensation, but for I just lost my train of thought. You were saying training for the teachers in the classroom. Is that something that you think fits here under support so training for teachers who are working with kids with special needs and behavioral issues?
Sure. I mean, yes, that sounds fine.
I saw Deborah Lee, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was going to respond to Mary Rose, but I'm just connecting with the chat.
Okay.
And Lois, it looks like you asked a question in chat. So should it state early intervention, excuse me? Could you expand a little on that? Do you mean including early intervention in the actual recommendation?
No, what I'm saying is based on what Mary Rose was sharing, is that should it be increased support for early learning centers to address early intervention?
Okay, that's what I
as
thought.
opposed to behavioral issues or students with special needs. Because then I think that if we say early intervention, I think that covers what she described as the way they all interconnect. And when she was speaking, she said, yes, that would be good. So Marianne, again, I lean on those who have expertise to be able to kind of shape this. So that was my suggestion, and she seemed to agree with it, but she can elaborate more.
Okay.
How does the group feel, Mary Rose, on changing that language?
I love it. Just because I think sometimes they are so separated sometimes, and it would be wonderful to see those viewed together, because I think sometimes we look at behavior as like an external thing and not as something that is like, part of the child, like we do with other early intervention needs.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I think this piece that I'm hearing you guys talk about behavioral issues and special needs, and it shouldn't be siloed. I think that info will fit nicely in like the body paragraph under this recommendation to kind of elaborate on the early intervention, if that sounds like a good fit for the group too.
Hey, Emily, can you make the screen a little larger? Maybe zoom in potentially or possibly for those like myself that prefer giant font.
There's got to be an easy way to do that, right?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Oh, there you go. That would be very helpful.
Is that better or further?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think so. Does that work for the group? Anybody else? Okay.
Okay. Also see, so I think we have a couple answers to define supports, behavioral issues. I'm zooming in even further. I don't know. I did that 100. Is there a funding request here? Any thoughts on that? My assumption would be yes, if we're increasing supports, that there's probably also, okay, so yes. And so then is this recommendation more to the legislator, to DCYF, to both? How do we think that fits? I think I kind of read it as a recommendation to DCYF, but I am not an early learning expert. So that's why I wanted to check in with you guys, because if you feel like this is a recommendation for the legislator that fits into this legislative report, we can keep it in there. If it goes to DCYF, we want to make sure we kind of get it in a little bit different version.
I think both, because of the funding request, and just to make sure that it gets seen too by more eyes. Because especially with things like getting more like training and coaching, like I'm trying to remember who was talking about that, like getting more support for the teachers, like so they can support these behaviors, and getting more funding for them and for more consultants to do that training. I think both would have to know.
Mhm. Mhm. And then another question, how can we ensure these supports are equitably distributed so that early learning centers in rural and remote areas and tribal communities are able to access support? Any thoughts on things you want to include in the report for that?
I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but maybe we could include that, the story that and I don't want to throw, like, you know, I know the early intervention providers have really been needing to catch up since, you know, and get restaffed and everything, but maybe we could include that report about Nia Bay, because I think it's probably not only an issue like up there. I think there's probably other areas in the state that are not being served necessarily as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, my son is having a little moment. Any other thoughts on this one, or I can move on to the next one?
This is Heidi. I actually have I have a thought, and I don't know if it would be addressed here or somewhere else, but you know, we've been having discussions in my region regarding the supports that actual childcare providers have, because a lot of times children will be going to like a developmental preschool if they're preschool age, or younger. Sometimes they don't really have very many supports, and they have a lot of support in their developmental preschool, but that doesn't follow them to the childcare center. And so I do see, I've heard some people saying, well, we're providing this service through these, you know, developmental preschools and through Head Starts and through other, you know, ECAP programs and other places that might have some availability to extra support. But these same children then are either coming to or from or going to childcare, general childcare, where they don't have those supports. And I think that there's a huge gap there. And so that's really, I'd want some conversation around how can that support continue? Or those children who don't qualify for developmental preschool because they may only have one identified challenge, such as, you know, they don't write IEPs for children who are only experiencing behavioral challenges, don't actually qualify for developmental preschool. So there's also a large gap there about children who would actually qualify for services.
Yeah, I am in total support of that statement. I had the opportunity once when observing students to, in a small community, observe a child who was in developmental preschool. And then I ended up observing in the childcare center that the student went to on the same day. And this is actually not a criticism of the childcare. The staff worked as hard as they could, but they didn't have the resources to continue on with what was going on for the child during that day.
Thank you, Nancy and Heidi. I think we'll jump to the next one. Partner with county or city government to have a teacher's aide navigator at local levels who have connections, and an understanding of local early learning communities and the issues providers face. So I think this also, to me, looked DCYF directed, but I may be misunderstanding. Another question, is there a budget funding request here? And what would this position specifically do?
Can you provide more information about what, I don't, I mean, I read the words, but I'm not sure what we're talking about here, really?
From my memory, and I'll open it up to others too after. This came out of a conversation about how there's not a lot of collaboration between the school districts and childcare providers. So they feel that's kind of a gap, and that having a navigator to kind of bridge that gap. I think that's kind of what the intent is here. Does anybody else have any thoughts or remember any conversation around this recommendation?
This is Colleen. I would agree that there's a disconnect and that there needs to be something put in place to support that relationship and transition of children from the early childhood system into the K-12 system. But I also think we should lean into the fact that there are existing coalitions throughout our state that focus on early childhood, and they already likely have relationships, or at least in my region, have relationships with the school districts and with the early learning providers and other services. So I'm not sure that making a government position to be a liaison between them is a solution I would be looking for, but rather finding a mechanism to supply support in areas where that maybe is not happening, or maybe that is conversations with the coalitions to see what is the existing relationship and partnership. I think there are probably incredible examples throughout our state of partnering between school districts and other service providers. But there's definitely a lack of that in many regions as well. So I'm a little confused on this like teacher's aid navigator concept. But yeah, just my 2 cents.
Any other thoughts on that? Maybe this recommendation doesn't feel like a good fit for this year.
I did. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Okay,
go ahead, Gary.
Really, just really quickly, I would echo what Colleen was saying. I'm just not quite sure I'm clear on what the issue is that's trying to get solved with this. That's part of why I wrote my comment about, is there a process as we go through these to sort of say, is this something that I don't even quite understand what this is trying to do. So I think if it's early childhood to kindergarten transition, then we should maybe be clear about the point of this one, but I'm not sure if that's what it was or not.
Debbie?
Well, I was just really going to say, I agree with what Gary said and also with what Colleen said. I don't think we need to me, it would be complicating things to have the county or the city government involved in this. That's not their wheelhouse. And there are a lot of things going on in the community. Let's build on and let's support what we have and build on that capacity, rather than if it's about kindergarten or if it's about transition between programs. It could be maybe depending on whether it's special ed or not. I don't know what the age group is exactly that they're talking about here, but let's build on what we have and support that. That's what would be my recommendation.
I have noted this item for us to further discuss, I think, following this meeting, since it isn't necessarily a specific recommendation that may fit here, but it sounds like that there is an opportunity for us to look at how to better connect the early learning communities with coalitions in and around their state and areas. So just a side note, I've kind of flagged that topic. I'm sure we'll have a discussion with the EC at a later date. But we've gathered most of that.
Thanks, Eric. So we'll just go ahead and move to the next one. The department could provide more opportunities to connect with families to help them understand what early learning is and how the process can differ for alternative unlicensed care. And this one also looks to be directed to DCYF. And I can remember this recommendation came out of a conversation about how providing quality childcare is costly. And a lot of times that cost, does get passed on to families. And so families who are maybe struggling or not wanting to pay the high cost are seeking out other forms of care that might not be licensed, and they might not understand like what they're missing by not going to a licensed childcare facility or family home care. Are there any thoughts on this recommendation or questions?
Sorry, Colleen again, and I apologize. I'm driving, so I don't know if it's echoey or anything. But don't worry, I'm hands-free. My wondering with this is that there's also already a lot of existing resource access and navigation programs out there, even like resource and family centers and things like that. And I would suspect that most of that work is significantly underfunded. And so if this is something going to the legislature, I would see it as looking for some more robust funding to make sure that this is a reality in all communities. Some communities are already doing this work, maybe have specific funding to do this work, but many communities probably don't have any funding support to make this a reality for their community. And I don't think that Washington has really found or will ever find a one size fits all resource and access, navigation type tool. So yeah, I think this would rather be a request for funding to make sure that there's maybe a pool of funds available to those organizations who do this work to build up this part of their supports.
Thank you, Colleen. So anybody else have any ideas or any thoughts on that? Or should I maybe adjust this language to reflect what how Colleen phrased it?
I guess I would just add, I agree with Colleen, and I just think that the one thing we could learn after many years of trying to do the opposite is that we can be much more effective by building on the relationships that communities have with families and caregivers, the relationships as opposed to a statewide something that is supposed to help connect families and help support the connection between caregivers and families. And so whatever the solutions are, and I agree with Colleen, I know there's some things we're working on in our region. The relationships exist in a way that I think we have more capacity to reach people if we have the support and the financial support to be able to build out some of those resources. I don't know if that's making sense. It is in my head, but it may not to anybody else.
Yeah, do you think the role is, rather than connect with families, to educate on FFN services and educate on licensed care and DCAP and other programs, supposed to connect with?
Would you say that again, Gary, please?
I think the word that I hit upon was the word connect with families. It sounds like the department's trying to have more conversations, meetings, that sort of thing, as opposed to providing educational resources. So I think some of those areas for educational resources would be on FFN care, supporting your family members and others when they're caring for your kids, but also education on the value of licensed care, ECAP, Head Start versus unlicensed childcare. I think those are education pieces as opposed to connecting with the families.
Gotcha. Okay. Yes, and I just think in the end that whether they're for families to understand what the resources are, I just think that I guess, and I'm hope this applies here. I'll just bluntly say that it's been my personal experience, at least in our community, that when there's a statewide entity that is trying to do things in the community, it doesn't work well, because and what we need to do is build the capacity of communities to be able to, whether it's connecting families with opportunities or whether it's providing them with information or just understanding even what the options are in the system, and how to navigate them. I just think there's capacity and activities going on in communities that can be just much more effective. So I guess I get a little nervous whenever I hear that the department would provide the opportunities. Maybe they could provide funding to create opportunities around the state. I'll just put it, I don't know. That's it.
So I'm wondering, trying to think of how. So the department could provide more opportunities to connect with families to help them understand what early learning is and how the process can differ for alternative unlicensed care. What about the department could provide funding and support to existing, trying to think of how.
Colleen or others from Lois or others from Washington Communities for Children, do you think the resource navigator concept and the referral system work? I'm not part of that group, but is that part of sort of what this is in your eyes?
Yeah, Gary, I think there would be quite a bit of crossover and alignment there with work. And as we're talking through this too, I'm kind of forming the concept of like, maybe this is the need for an education campaign or communication toolkit or something like that, that could then be utilized in different communities to really get the word out about what are your options as a parent, and even, information about subsidies and things like that. But communities could build upon it and include, maybe a community has, like Spokane right now has funding from the city and county to do some tuition relief for families, and some other work and stuff for providers recruiting new workforce. So I think, it could be something like that. And I do think with Washington Communities for Children, their resource access and navigation could certainly do this work.
Yeah, I agree with Colleen. Thanks for asking the question the way you did, Gary. And I just want to say one other thing about communication. Since I'm in Southwest Washington, I always feel the need when we're talking about communication coming from the state and how it gets disseminated. Please remember that in Southwest Washington, we are all part of the Portland media market. So we literally, unless you happen to go look at channels that are from the other parts of the state, just local channels we don't get through regular news what happens in the state of Washington. So I just always want to remind people of that, because it's a different dynamic down here. And that's why I really believe that the idea of creating something that the state would do, but then also allowing us to locally use the networks that we have, and especially in Southwest, I'll just use that to get information out
Thank you, Debbie. That's something I definitely have never thought of in Spokane, that you guys don't get the same news channels. I want to check in. I've been trying to kind of, with the conversation, edit the recommendation. The department could provide funding and support to work with communities to develop a communication campaign with options and resources from local communities. Is that kind of getting out what you guys are saying? Am I missing anything? Misrepresenting anything?
Like, I would recommend that you change could to should. The department should provide funding and support. I don't know how the group feels about that, but that is a little more powerful.
Everyone okay with this for now anyway, in its form? Any hesitations? Should we move on? Okay, move on. Okay, work with OSPI aides to ensure one-on-one aids, follow the child to their after-school program, and work with OSPI behavioral health providers and youth development programs to ensure preventative supports and activities are high quality, consistent, and aligned between the school day and after school, as well as between the school year and the summer. So again, is there a funding request here? Is this directed to DCYF or the legislator? And then there are, it kind of looks like there's two separate recommendations in here. Should they be separated? Do you think there's a way to make this one recommendation? What are thoughts? Or any thoughts on how having a one-on-one aide follow a child from school to childcare, how that could improve things? Nancy, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, it's definitely a funding request because you would have to pay more for those, pay for those aides to follow kids. And it's also, because it's an OSPI, it would be a partnership thing that would have to be developed. With OSPI.
So I can kind of see this one as being both, and it could be a recommendation to the legislator to require DCYF and OSPI to work together. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is Heidi. I have a couple thoughts on this. I think that the concept, like I was mentioning before, of having supports wherever the child is going, you know, after school programs or to another program, is really a great idea. I think that we have to be really careful about having any kind of requirement that it's the same person that follows this child. The reason I believe this is I was a teacher, a Head Start teacher in an inclusion classroom. And so for quite a few years in a couple different states. And one of the things that was really challenging for us, we had one place that did try this, and it was complicated because you have people who are following the child from programs who don't really work in the childcare setting, and there were a lot of different expectations. There was kind of a misalignment, I think, of what the roles were, and it created a lot of complication. For me, it would have been much easier for there to be a person who was in my program who was trained by us, who worked side by side with the teachers, that was able to connect with the other person that child had services from in the previous program. And so they would kind of work together to ensure those services were streamlined and they were getting similar supports and care. The other thing was that sometimes we'd have a para or supporting 2 or 3 different children. So they wouldn't be able to follow all those children. So for me, it's more important that there's funding at whatever site those children are going to be able to provide those services in-house with some kind of a bridge. I know that's complicated, but I think that's something that we would need to flush out a little bit more.
Heidi, can you just repeat that last thing you said? To me, it's more important to provide funding.
Provide funding to the, I guess, like the childcare center or the location that the child is receiving that second set of services, maybe in-house of where they're being cared for at that second location.
I would also say that's important because the number of hours in a day a person can work would, if it's the same person, that could get a little crazy too.
Well, and the other thing that I find is that there could be a major disconnect between the services that the child is getting at, say, their developmental preschool or wherever they are, and the child care center, because of a lot of reasons, training, roles, expectations. It could be that the place that they're going to is not supportive of some of the techniques that the service, that the original para might be using. I mean, there were a lot of challenges to that, is what unexpected challenges, and it's really great idea, but I think that there just needs to be a little bit more thought, I think, put into what that support might actually look like.
I want to second that. And I was a school social worker, and so I had come from, working in mental health, and a lot of the people who are brought in to support these kinds of things are brought in from other fields, and things are different. And think, like somebody just said, things are different between K-12 and early learning. So I think this would be kind of a broad, and it is complicated, but it's really important to have that, like Heidi said, training people in-house, especially in rural and remote areas, like having that capacity built in that local system, and also making sure that people are working together and not working in with opposing stuff. I do think sometimes I was just wondering if this can be tied in with the pyramid model implementation that's being that the state is doing. Is anybody here doing that? Or tied in with that?
In the child care aware system, we have a some regional works going on in Southwest Washington through ESD 113. Debbie, I don't know if you've heard much about that, but I'm not that familiar with what's happening. Or ESD 112, I'm sorry, ESD 112.
ESD, I know ESD, I just left them, but ESD 114 is doing this in our region, doing the pyramid model implementation. So it would be really cool if those same people who are doing that coaching could work, with infant early childhood mental health consultants who are working with the programs, and work with the programs themselves to kind of,
So to answer Gary's question, yes, ESD 112 is also implementing that. I'm not as directly involved in it personally, but I know that they are doing it. We have a lot of staff that have participated.
So
I think that's an interesting idea, Mary. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Just in thinking about hearing some people say this might need some more thought, some more fleshing out and conversation. Is this something that you think it is important to include in the legislative report this year, or is this something that you maybe want to be added to topic discussions for next year's report to discuss it more? Or do we feel like there's an actionable effective recommendation we can make on this now?
Could we ask to have a work group for it? Maybe to have, because it does feel big and complicated. So is that, and would that be an okay ask? Like to get people together from like DCYF and OSBI and
Yeah, that's definitely something we can include with the follow-up and work with Aaron and Eric and Lois and Enrica to share. I can't promise that yes, we can create a work group, but yeah, we can continue this conversation for sure. So maybe does everyone feel okay if we put a pause on this recommendation for this report, or does anyone feel like, no, I think it's really important that we get this figured out before this year's is submitted? I'm not seeing any hands, so maybe I'll make a little note that to develop a work group on this.
Shell said in the chat, is there an existing work group with parties represented that can be tapped instead?
Thank you for that. I have 3 screens up, but the chat is not one of them right now. So sorry if I'm missing anything in the chat.
I got it too. Thank you, Mary. We appreciate that.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. Work with the legislator to fund incentives and develop more opportunities for local school districts and early learning communities to communicate and collaborate from an educator perspective. So this is kind of similar to the teacher's aid recommendation a couple ago, but more less specific, I guess. And a question, what is the desired outcome? Should this be framed as a legislative budget request?
I think that this could almost be kind of combined with the previous one that we were talking about. And I'm assuming there is some sort of undertone to these suggestions due to transition to kindergarten or TK, because, you know, there's verbiage that states that this collaboration should be happening and there should be coordinated efforts to figuring out, you know, options for children, and transition to kindergarten should only be serving children who do not have other access to early learning. And we know that's not what's really happening in this state. So as I read this, that's just the undertone that I'm picking up on from it. And so I think that there definitely does need to be direction from the legislature to make it very explicit what is expected of communities and how they should be collaborating. I think that collaboration is going to look different in different areas of the state for all of the reasons that are out there. But right now, there is not an incentive nor explicit language requiring the K-12 system to partner with licensed childcare or other early learning opportunities. So I think we could go back and do some combination of those things. And if I'm right about the undertone of this, then let's just be explicit and say that our recommendation has to do with transition to kindergarten, and that, you know, we want to see specific changes from that. You know, there was legislation that wasn't as successful as many had hoped last session. I eagerly await seeing if there is more coming, but recommendations from ELAC supporting that collaboration could go a long ways to supporting any new legislation that comes out.
Thank you, Colleen. Sorry, I have to be off camera for a minute. Eric, can I pass the share screen to you for a second? Thanks.
Yes, you bet. One second, everyone. I'm gonna open back up where Emily was. How's that? Is this the question she had up on the screen? Sorry to ask.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I believe Emily had asked you all, should this be framed as a legislative budget request? What is the desired outcome?
Well, I think Colleen's point, I think we can answer that until Colleen's point is addressed, which is this really about transition to kindergarten? And how do we more clearly articulate what the issue is and the solution? Because I think right now it's pretty vague as to what that is that is stated.
So then maybe this isn't necessarily an appropriate recommendation for this point in time, or maybe there's a little more work to be done behind it.
Yeah, Eric, I would also like to lift up what Jen shared in the chat. I think what she has to say is very valid too, and the great part about us all being here at ELAC together to share our different perspectives. She's focusing on that relationship between educators, so an educator in an early learning setting, and then an educator that would be working with that child or those children in the K-12 system. And what she shared there is also a very, very valid topic. And so I don't want to just strong arm the conversation because of what I shared. I think what she shared is also important.
Thank you, Colleen. So then maybe changing the wording to reflect Jen's language. And I don't know if I want to fumble in here on some of Emily's stuff, so I won't dive right in and just start changing that. I like the way that Jen had worded that, allowing early educators to access professional development opportunities offered to school districts. Jen, when you speak of those professional development opportunities, are you referencing professional development opportunities with DCYF or just professional development opportunities as a whole?
Jen wrote in
Sorry,
the chat that there's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've got my noise situation sorted. I think the idea that there are many opportunities for professional development that early learning people have access to, but choose not to take because they don't offer STARS hours, or they're only offered for like CEUs or clock hours. And so a pathway to provide early learning professionals that are not part of the school district system to be able to have the same professional development opportunities that the school districts have, whether that's through the school district, through DCYF, through other places in the community or the country.
You'll find I'm not as good as Emily at listening and typing, so I will do my best here. Questions. The same opportunities available to other school districts. Is that what you were referencing? I mean, yes, Jen? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
That makes a little more sense now. Work with the legislature to fund incentives and develop better access for early learning professionals to have the same opportunities available to local school districts and early learning communities. I don't know if we necessarily need this last bit of this recommendation. Perhaps anyone care to say yes or no as to whether or not that last sentence is necessary here?
I don't know if it necessarily, well, maybe it's a different, I don't know, I'm having trouble articulating. But I also see this
So am I.
recommendation as providing a pathway for collaboration between, there are many students who have received services in an early learning facility as well as in a public school facility. And often there's not communication between the two programs. I think this might go back to a recommendation a bit ago about having services follow the child, having the funding follow the child, you know, having the information follow the child.
And yes, Lois, I think you are correct. As I've been listening to a lot of the conversations, it appears to me that obviously anything that has some funding request behind it, I think that is not only a request to DCYF or a recommendation, but at the same time, DCYF will of course be, if it's appropriate, that recommendation would come from them to the legislature in addition to you all. So I think that's something that should be noted. Thank you, Lois. Okay, so I think we've cleaned this up a bit. There's not a whole lot of context behind it, but I think it's enough to be able to include into the recommendation report. I would like to open it back up to anyone maybe that does have some thoughts on what maybe are some of the specific ways or solutions you might have to this recommendation. It's of course one thing to say to fund this, but you know, any specifics we can provide or you all can provide behind these recommendations, I do know are very, very helpful to DCYF and even the legislature. So with that, I'll take a moment. If anyone would like to share anything additional.
Yeah, Eric, on that line of thought, it's going to also include making sure that there's STARS hours available, just like there are continuing education credits available to the staff. I want to call out also the general factor that, you know, K-12 professionals have the summer off in a sense and are given, you know, have that time to actually do these trainings and things like that, whereas many early learning professionals are hourly wage earners and losing time at work if and when they're doing training, paying for training out of pocket. There's a whole slew of things that happen there. So I think that when we talk about access, I just want to highlight that we're not just talking about like, hey, you're allowed to come in our building and do this training with us. There's a lot more to it. So just highlighting those things. And then one process question, will this Jamboard be available to participants for any period of time after this meeting? where we could go in and plug in more of this stuff, because I hate to take up more time or space getting into these specifics, but I would be happy to add that content to this Jamboard outside of our meeting time.
Yes, we will have the Jamboard open a little longer. I'm not sure on the exact date or timelines, but we will leave this open for you all to continue to contribute to. And on that note, it looks like Nicole, you have joined us. Thank you for being here. And Nicole actually has a question in chat that relates to the earlier recommendation that we kind of edited out. And she's asking what you all mean by the same opportunities available to local school districts and early learning communities. So maybe Jen, now that Nicole's here, if you could kind of reiterate some of that, that'd be very helpful for her to kind of help understand. No worries, Nicole. We're glad you're here.
Sure. My thoughts were about mostly around professional development, but there are many opportunities within the school districts to for early learning people within the school district for professional development that are often not available to early learning folks on the private side outside the school district, and allowing those of us outside the school districts to access those opportunities, but then also be able to get STARS hours for them at the same sort of one-to-one rate, or and then the idea of being able to collaborate with those the professionals there within the school district where the children in the programs the children go between. That was my thought.
Thank you.
That's helpful. I just think, as we submit this, I just want to make sure that we have specifics so that we're sort of saying, or even if it's, I think I hear some such as is in there, so that we make sure we're, I think, listing a menu of options that you all are thinking about.
Yeah, that's about exactly where we're at. Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, and Emily, I'll let you flag me back when you want to take back over the controls so I don't railroad this thing on. But I feel like we have a decent grasp of this particular recommendation. With that, we'll hop forward to the next, which is grant related. And before grant applications go live, DCYF should connect with the community to address any equity and address concerns. So my first question would be, and maybe the individual that made that recommendation, how should DCYF connect, or what should they be doing to address that communication channel? And I will open that up to the room.
This is Heidi. At the very least, if we're talking about equity, we need to make sure that it's translated in the majority of languages that people are going to be accessing it, so that they can access it at the same time. One of the challenges has been that the time that it takes services, or grants to work with somebody to translate it and complete, helps a provider complete it in a language that's not their own. There's been times that the money's been gone before they're able to access or submit those grants. I think sometimes, especially for some of our providers who don't have access to good TA or assistance with some of these grants, are not able to finish it in quite as timely of a manner and complete it in a way that is going to actually get them the money, because they might be competing with grant writers that somebody has hired in some of these circumstances. And so it really, it's a major issue that we've seen time and time again when these grants come up. And I'll let somebody else maybe comment more about that who've been affected by that.
We have a couple great questions and suggestions in chat. Colleen asked if maybe there could be a grant application, a standing grant application review committee. And Mary had suggested that maybe create a list of who should see the grants and ensure the grants are sent out to current contacts on those lists. I do know Nicole probably can provide quite a bit of context behind what leads up to a grant. But it sounds to me like maybe the timeliness of when you all are learning about these opportunities, and then of course the way that they're being translated and more equitable and inclusive to all. But I do know that there's a lot of that work that does go on, that the early learning team works with the communications team and works with the grants team. And, you know, it's a real fairly oiled process. Like, they do a really good job, in my opinion, of how they roll these things out. A lot of times it's so fast for them. And so maybe Nicole, if you want to provide a little more context to how some of that rolls out, and maybe some solutions that we could find and look at.
Well, so one, I want to appreciate the solutions that have been shared in the chat, and what Heidi shared. And, you know, I think we hear there's a real reality between someone who has access to a grant writer and someone who doesn't, which is why I think we've really tried to simplify the process. I really like these ideas, and so, you know, having, you know, more input on, you know, where we can simplify, where there may have been some unintended impacts. You know, as we were rolling these things out, we certainly want to hear that. This idea of a standing grant application review committee, I think, is, you know, certainly one worthy of exploring. And I think the other questions I have here is, you know, how does provider supports and ELAC then fit into that? And maybe that they're just part of this feedback loop. And I think the other thing I'm seeing here is, how do we do a better job of not only contacting and letting providers know this is available, but all of our partners who are interacting with providers as well, so that they can help get the word out. We have tried to do refinement processes on things like complex needs, I believe, and equity grants. But yeah, keep the ideas coming, because we're always looking to improve and always improve here.
Add better in there. Okay. Tons of great feedback on this. I think this is actually a pretty solid recommendation. I feel like there's a lot of direction behind it, and it's as we are able to incorporate this into the final draft, that it should be something that, again, as DCYF takes this information and kind of uses to work with the legislature, I think that's wise. So Emily, you want to take it back over?
Yeah, I have a question real quick though. Maybe this was already said, but does this does this recommendation look to be to DCYF or the legislator? I'm just wondering if it makes sense to include in the report, or if it makes sense to include, no, you're fine, in a document with recommendations more to the agency, not the legislator.
Yeah, I would let the group answer that, but my assumption is this is really more of a DCYF recommendation.
I think it is, you know, a recommendation to DCYF, and maybe Nicole can answer this. I would assume there may need to be some funding associated with this, especially because I would envision there being people with lived experience. So when Heidi's talking about a provider who does not speak English, there should be a provider who does not speak English on this review committee. And we would need to make sure that there is translation support for that person. That person is being compensated for their time, their travel if necessary, all of those different things. So while I think this is a recommendation to DCYF, I think DCYF would also need to have funds to make this happen. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that, Nicole, but just
No, I think that's a great point, Colleen. And I also really appreciate sort of how do you have folks, what I hear on the standing piece is like, who's the group that you can go to and say, hey, this is coming out. I think having stipends for participation and lived experience, that is right on, and not something, if this is outside of provider supports or ELAC, that we would have funding for. And so we would need to ask for funding for that.
Do you want me to give you back screen share?
Sure.
You just ping me if you need me to take it back.
Sounds good. Okay, now I just have to make sure I'm sharing the right screen.
Yeah, we were on 7.
I think, and we were done, right? So good to move on to the next one. Any other final thoughts on the grant applications? Okay. So our last recommendation in part 1 is develop a web page to monitor the use of grant funds. And this was an addition from the survey that we sent out to you all it's probably like a month ago at this point, just asking for additional recommendations. So I wanted to check in with how the group felt on that. Also, there is a grant dashboard in existence. So if there's additional information, if we can just have a conversation about what specific information you guys would like to see on that webpage. And if there is agreement, because like I said, I think this is the first time you guys have seen this specific recommendation in a report development session. It was included in the documents. Is that something you guys would like to see more information on the grant dashboard?
Emily, do you have a sense as to whether that's saying that DCYF has a certain amount of money and how much has gone out from DCYF, or is this about how individual grant recipients are being tracked? I'm not quite sure I understand what the recommendation is.
Yeah, I think honestly both of those could be true. My instinct is that it's probably the first one, how DCYF is rolling out that money, not necessarily how the money is being spent. But Nicole might have more info on what info is already available on the web, on that dashboard, to see if that brings up anything for anyone else that's missing. If not, we can send it out afterwards.
Yeah, I'm happy to share, and I can also share, Gary. I think to your question, some of the things I've heard from this group before also were, I think, so one, what we share is we often share summaries of how much has gone out, who applied, what were the top asks, and when we had some of the stabilization funds and others, I think we did that monthly. Now with some of the grants having timelines, that I think happens towards the end of the grants. Some things that I've heard in the past are sharing more about what the impacts have been as providers have accessed funds, right? Like what were they able to do in their classroom or licensed family home, and how did that change their practice? And because some of those are newer, we're just getting information back from providers about that. So that's one thing I've heard, and I'm curious if that is what this group is looking for, more like hear how these funds were used and how it changed something in my program. The other thing I'd heard in the past is wanting to know the actual names of providers who have received grants, and I'm double checking on that, but that is typically for us a public records request, certainly for centers, and then for licensed family homes, we don't because of some of the laws and rules and privacy protections around that, we don't share that. So that is another thing I've heard here. So that's a little bit about what we share now. What I think I've heard folks are looking for, and again, would just appreciate any feedback around what would be useful or what else you all would like to see. And then we can take that back and see how we might be able to incorporate that.
And again, this recommendation came from the survey, so potentially that person isn't in the room and maybe they didn't know the webpage existed with this grant info. But if there's not, is there any other specific information you guys would like to see on that? Or is this maybe a recommendation that you guys don't want to keep for this year?
This is Gary again. I think it's always valuable to have information on the impact that funding has to people in the field. So at the same time, it can, if it is sort of cost benefit, how hard is that and how do you collect it and that sort of piece. So if the department can figure out a way to do that, that is doesn't cost a lot, but can share information with the rest of the provider community as well as with the legislature and funders, I think that's really valuable.
Okay, any additional thoughts, or does it make sense to change that to develop a web page to monitor the use of grant funds to share the impacts of how grants changed, not their practice, but childcare and family home? Does it make sense to be more specific in the recommendation? Do you guys think about including the impacts of the grant funds?
So if I understand what this is asking for, and I know there's the dashboard. I don't, if there's a way to create it together, I mean, like the information can be in one place, so we're not looking, to the web page for this, to the dashboard for this. I think that's, instead of creating something brand new, maybe it's just taking what we have and figuring out how to add more information to it. I mean, I'm not sure how all of that works, so I just hate creating more things that if there's already something in place, I would rather just make that better.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Nancy. And I think it's understanding from this group. And if you get a chance to look at some of those links, and you see what's on there, what is missing from there that you would like to see? And I think that will be helpful, because I think what I'm hearing is, let's not create something new. Let's understand a little bit about what's already out there. And then I appreciate, Gary, what you're saying too around what is a way that's cost effective and rolling up the information to share stories from providers. So I think as we go through some of the reporting periods for grants, how do we take those and make summaries of them that maybe go on some of the pages that are already there, that hey, here's what X provider is doing with their equity grant.
I'm not sure that I have appropriately captured this recommendation, so I'm just welcoming any additional edits, or was I wrong to maybe delete the previous one too soon? Any thoughts? Excuse me.
You might want to say childcare and early learning to make it inclusive of VCAP, because there are grants there as well.
And Emily, maybe indicate to add to the existing or an existing landing page, whether it is the dashboard or the grants webpage. I think there's a few opportunities for us to kind of use some low-hanging fruit with some data that might be available, and then find a fairly efficient way to just simply have that updated on not necessarily the dashboard. I think that's a little more complex, but I do believe on the grants page itself that some of the existing data could possibly be added. So Nicole, anything to share?
Well, I was just gonna say, I feel like I've heard a couple of times too, like I would love sometime like with this group or another group to like go through what's available on our website and sort of say, what is it that you want to see differently around some of the investments? Because I think it's come up a couple of times, right? How is DCYF sort of showing their work in progress and investments and all of those things? And I know we don't have time for that today, but perhaps that's maybe something we could do with a group of folks who want to go through and help us think about what is potentially missing from our website, or what information is it that you really want to see about the work that's happening so that we can better get that out there, right? Because I think the goal is, if you want to learn, find out about what's going on, that you have an easy way to go do that yourself versus having to ask for information all the time.
But I've actually flagged that topic for further conversation.
Okay, thank you all. I'm going to jump to our second Jamboard. So if you can drop that link in the chat, Jessica. This is part 2, expanding access to childcare and early learning programs. The first one is streamline income eligibility between ECAP and working connections. And we have a note aligning this, a suggestion to align this with the access proviso. Families should pay no more than 7% of their income. How would the group like this to look? Same SMI, same income and allowable activities, or something else? Any thoughts coming up, either the recommendation or the question suggestion? I can zoom in again. Sorry, guys.
Lee, do you know more about what's the end goal for this recommendation? Because streamlining income eligibility, is it so that certain there's the same levels of income have access to both of these programs, or is it ECAP is, because I know ECAP has priority points, so is the intention that anyone at certain thresholds would automatically go to an ECAP program versus working connections? I'm struggling to figure out what is the end goal of streamline. Let's please streamline a lot of things so that families have a one-stop shop where they can put their information in and find out what are all of the programs, especially those in their communities that they qualify for, and then pick what is the best fit for their family. But streamlining the income eligibility is kind of where I'm getting stuck. Is the intention to have one program serve one income bracket and the other serve a different, or what? And maybe whoever shared this recommendation is available to share more about that, but I'm not really understanding.
Any thoughts from anyone else? I am not sure myself on that, Colleen, but I want to open it up to the group.
It may be related to the way that the incomes are calculated, whether or not it's one's using the SMI and the other's using a different calculation. I don't know if that's what this is referenced.
I can weigh in. I think that this might have been something that I brought up previously. When you look at the income eligibility charts, they are different, but they both go by SMI, but the charts are not the same. So I don't know if they're looking at different years for the SMI, but it should be, in my opinion, they should be the same, whatever they're looking at to make that determining factor. The SMI chart should be the same. a family of 4 should be able to make this much money and be in the 60th percentile, no matter which chart you're looking at, whether it be ECAP or Working Connections, which is the copay calculation table that I would look at. Does that make sense?
Kathy, that one makes sense to me, because once you raise that, we did go back and look at those things, and we're working on making those so they are congruent. Part of it was where we were where we were looking at the cutoffs on there. So I know that the team is working on making those so they're looking at the same tables for SMI. I can get back to this group about when that will be updated. And so I think that is one space, right? As we look at SMI, I think another piece here is that we are going to different SMI levels, which sometimes has caused a family may be eligible for one program and not the other. So I don't know if that's what folks are looking at as well. We're trying to do some work around, allowable activities and counting child support and those types of things. So yeah, getting specifics here will be super helpful to us, as Colleen noted as well.
This is Deanne, and this is a topic that I think also has a family focus and a provider focus side to it, which is, the whole goal is to get kids into programs that they're eligible for, and it seems challenging. And so I think not only is it about streamlining, but it's about connecting up ECAP and Working Connections to understand each other well enough that we can make sure that a kiddo is able to get into whatever program they're eligible for. So I think it's streamlining as part of the process, but maybe there's a bigger process, which is ensuring that eligibility is clear for ECAP and Working Connections childcare, so that children are placed, again, going back to impact, so that children can easily be placed into a program, an early learning experience for them. And one of the to-dos would be maybe streamlining the income eligibility, but the other is, creating understanding between those two systems and all of that, which I think goes back to Colleen. I don't know whether that's where your confusion may lay too, is what is it we're trying to ultimately do is not just an activity, but rather change the way families experience the system, and how the provider community in both those worlds are able to direct and support and help get a kiddo so that they don't fall between the cracks.
So I'm wondering.
Oh, sorry, Emily. I was just going to say, I threw it in the chat, but I remembered you said you were not seeing the chat. If, we're talking about a chart that is streamlining some of this income information, I think it would be hugely helpful to families if that also included income related information around Head Start, home visiting, or potentially other programs. Because, if a parent is looking for supports, that can look different. And the only ECAP and Working Connections are not the only options out there. And so I think if a family could see themselves on a chart and their income bracket and know where they may be able to find supports, maybe that's somebody who's looking to get back into the workforce. Maybe they're not at that point yet, but they need some other supports. And I think that's where, home visiting and some other programs come into play. And I know most of those applications have an income requirement to them.
Thanks, Colleen. I'm wondering then, so I heard Deanne say streamlining income eligibility is part of it. So keep that in. Do we feel like that's do we need more info to make the streamline income eligibility understandable? Like with Colleen's questions at the beginning of this conversation. Or is the context provided in the sticky notes? Does that kind of alleviate the questions we had? Not hearing much. Nicole, does that make sense to you with the context, or do you think we still need some digging?
Including exception. Deanne, can you clarify your including exceptions to the income rule?
Yeah, I know that there are, it is so not linear, especially around ECAP and Head Start, that I think looking at the income is a top drawer issue. Like if they have a special need, sometimes that overrides. If they're over income, they have that gets eligible in certain instances. And I think that sometimes the exception sometimes causes a huge amount of confusion around those issues. Does that make sense, Nicole?
Yeah. And I'm just trying to think. So it's almost the way I'm envisioning this is that that there's maybe some sub bullets under here, and I heard, how are we streamlining that for families and for providers? And so I just want to check in there because I heard both of those things. And then I think we need to group what we want to streamline for families and how we can make things easy for providers. And I think the other thing I'm hearing here is it's just about sort of what are some of the communication tools that we actually create so that they make sense. Does that, I'm checking for understanding. Make sure I know sort of where we're headed here.
I think the main driver for me is so that families don't go, oh, I'm not eligible, and they walk away when in fact they might be. That's actually what's driving my comment. Is this overarching desire for all children that are eligible to get into a program and be able to go, oh, it's likely I'm going to be eligible or whatever.
I think that is helpful for me. I think this is a place where I know Colleen asked how long the Jamboard would be open, and I would just really encourage y'all, as you were thinking about this or talking with your colleagues, if more specifics come up, to go in and add those to the Jamboard so we can make sure we get those categorized. Because again, I think as we send this forward to the legislature, we want to be really specific about what our asks are so they know that where we're headed and what we would like to see.
So when I read this, I'm also wondering, are we just talking about aligning income eligibility? Are we also potentially talking about some of those other factors that could make a child eligible possibly for working connections, such as the over income and the point systems that are used in ECAP? Are we also talking about that or not?
I would look to this group around what they think here. I would say we want to simplify, and I would say we don't want to go to, I'm not sure, Nancy, if you're saying we want to go to prioritization points or things like that. And
I'm not saying that I would agree or want to do that. I'm just wondering if that was the question that was being asked here or recommended. So I'm not, when I read all of it, what I heard in some of the conversation was, do we want to talk about income alignment, or do we want to also talk about, other ways of qualifying families? I'm not sure that, income alignment would be my priority at this point, if you were asking me personally, but I just was wondering. And yes, it would make, I think Colleen said something about complicated. Yes, it would make it complicated.
The other thing it makes me think about is even just, again, showing sort of over the last several years in particular, right, as Fair Start for Kids Act and other things were implemented, and even just this last legislative session, there are certain groups who may be eligible now that weren't in the past. Like, oh, okay, if you're a childcare provider and you make up to X% of state median income, you'll soon be eligible for licensed childcare. And so I think it's part of what I'm hearing in sort of those communications tools is not only talking about the income pieces, but I think, Nancy, this gets at what you and Deanne were talking about as well. Where are the places beyond just income, like, that folks are determined eligible, and how do we communicate that? Yeah. On the initial ask that Kathy brought up, what I will say is we update our SMI charts in April every year. And that is when you'll see some alignment around those ECAP and working connections charts. And that the timing of that gives us time to build in business requirements and all of those things that are needed in our IT systems to do that work. So I just wanted to let you all know that.
Before we move on, I'm wondering, based off what I heard, should I add something in here about communication? So align income eligibility and other eligibility requirements between ECAP and Working Connections childcare for providers and families. Then I was hearing a lot about the communication piece. So is that part of the recommendation too, communicating all of the different eligibility? Okay, I'm just gonna add communication piece for now, so you guys don't have to watch me fumble over writing. Unless somebody else has a great idea for how to incorporate that, please put it in the chat and I'll just take your idea. But I think, do you want to move on to the next one, or any more thoughts about this recommendation? Okay, we'll jump to the second one. The working childcare Working Connections childcare rate increase mandated by FSKA should be increased beyond the 85th percentile. And a suggestion for how to word this, the recommendation could read something like fully fund the cost of quality care recommendations that are due to the legislator in 2025.
So I have a recommendation on that. And Nicole, maybe you can help too here. I know there were some changes in the last few years to try to support communities to pay above what they might be able to charge in there because they're maybe a economically distressed area. And the concept of many people really don't understand the concept of the market rate. So what that's saying is that you have a distribution of what people charge. So maybe it's from $600 to $1,000. And the 85th percentile is maybe the $950 out of that 1,000. That's maybe where the 85th percentile is. So that basically means anybody who charges from 600 to 950 gets paid that full amount. So the issue for me isn't raising the percentage to 100%, because that's really going to be your wealthiest communities that are charging that 100th percentile, right? So maybe downtown Seattle charges the highest rate, but Kent charges the 60th or 50th percentile, right? So there are serious issues around paying enough for quality childcare, but it's not the percentile. I don't think it needs to be changed. So Nicole, would you mind sharing a little bit about what you guys have done, and maybe you can help us with some better wording around this?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things here. So one part of what had happened in the past is that providers, each time we raised the subsidy rate, providers would then have to raise their private pay rate if they wanted to get the subsidy rate if it was higher than their private pay. And recently there were rule changes around that because we were able to show Region 10 through what's called a narrow cost analysis, that really, even when we were paying at those market rate percentile rates, that it wasn't really enough. And so now we can pay the subsidy rate regardless of whether the provider, whether that private pay rate is lower. So there's that. So that is one thing that I hope has been helpful. I think the second thing on this one that I really think about is that I want to acknowledge that this language around market rate survey and the 85th percentile is the current environment that we're in. And it's part of where we are now. But I think with this report, we also want to acknowledge where we're headed. And that is that movement away from the market rate survey to that cost of quality care. And so I really think that we want something here. I guess my recommendation to you all would be to have that forward thinking, that forward look here and say, hey, we know we're doing work with Child Care Aware and the design team right now around the cost of care. And so instead of saying, fund beyond the 85th percentile, and you could still say something about FSKA in here, but fund the cost of quality care recommendations that are due to the legislature in 2025 per the Fair Start for Kids Act, something that acknowledges we've got to move away from the market rate to paying the cost of quality care. And Kathy, your question, at what point is percentile rate changing to cost of quality care? So it is a process. We just got approval from Region 10 to move away from doing the market rate survey and doing a cost of quality care study. And so you would see we have recommendations that are due to the legislature for the 25-27 session related to this. And that's required of us by the Fair Start for Kids Act, and we will use a cost study as we make those recommendations. So it will take us a bit of time. I acknowledge it's 2023 right now, and that will be in the 2025 session.
Thanks, Nicole. I feel like that context was super helpful. Oh, Deanne, go ahead.
I offered just a different way of putting this, so it's not quite so directive around the fully fund, but rather I put it in the chat there. Support steps that will result perhaps in DCYF transitioning away from a market rate model of reimbursement to a cost of quality reimbursement. So we aren't quite so focused on the report, but rather what we're trying to accomplish. Just wondering if that would be a better sort of top level recommendation than the working connections rate, blah, 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 blah. So I'm offering a suggestion of alternate language for consideration.
What are thoughts on this language? Support steps that will cause, you used a different word than cause and I missed it. I think
I said that result in DCY, in DCYF transitioning away from market rate model of reimbursement to a cost of quality model of reimbursement. I didn't quite finish there. Yeah.
I like both of those concepts that are in writing down there. So if one of them could be I'd be happy with one of them being the top level comment and one being a sticky note, but I don't know which would be which.
Other thoughts? Have two now, similar ones. Sounds like they both kind of get at what you guys are trying to say.
I agree with the changes. I think this looks good. And I just can't help myself but call out that along with the Fair Start for Kids Act, we have the collection of the capital gains taxes. And those dollars, when initially advocated for, were promised to be used for early childhood and early learning expenses. And we know the legislature is already not necessarily doing that as it was originally planned and promised to be. And so I do think that this recommendation closely aligns with the fact that we had a tax passed in tandem to fund these things, and yet we already see our legislature not using those dollars to do what those dollars were initially advocated for. So I think we're so close to that topic with this recommendation. I would really encourage this group to consider going more to the point with this recommendation and recommending that more explicit language get added to the capital gains tax expenditures, especially given that those dollars were put into a K-12 account, and there's a lot of uncertainty on how those funds will now be spent by our legislature.
So Colleen, you're wanting more specific language in the direction of the capital gains tax.
Yes, back to what was originally promised. So when advocating for the capital gains tax, it was stated that the first 500 million annually would be allocated specifically to early learning expenditures. And now that's being said that it's just maybe the first 500 million that's ever collected has to go to that, and or there's even question marks around whether even we'll get to that 500 million actually being spent in early learning. So I know personally, when I was asked to testify and support that tax, that was with the understanding that 500 million annually would go to early learning, and that would not go to cover costs that the state was already covering, but that would be going to increase funding in the early learning space. And so I know that is a huge concern of the field at this point in time, because I don't think capital gain, my personal opinion is capital gains would not have passed if it were not on the back of early learning. And we are already seeing that funding being pulled and used for other things by our legislature. So I believe ELAC should take a very strong stance on the spending of those dollars.
Okay, so do we want to add something about capital gains tax into the actual recommendation? Or do you see that as being more context to fully funding or a separate recommendation altogether? Any thoughts on that?
I think you could have a standalone recommendation.
Okay, so what if we take this capital gains into a new recommendation? If we're doing that, which of these languages, which of these items do you think makes most sense to be the recommendation, and which sentence is a better support sentence? Or, part of it?
I think the way those two are funded now, they actually might be separate as well. Because one's about the cost of quality, and the other is about the recommendations that are due this coming into 2 sessions from now. So in other words, what I'm trying to say there is the second one seems to be a short-term 2-year fund, or what's on the horizon for 2025. The other one is maybe longer term in terms of transitioning away. I'm not quite sure whether that's a 2-year plan or whether that's a 5-year plan or longer.
I see the second statement as one of the steps along the way. So it just depends on how much you want to, how punchy you want the second one to be. That would decide whether we wanted to go short term or longer term.
Okay, unless there are any major disagreements, then I think it might make sense to have this be more of a supportive and to have the recommendation be support steps that will result in DCYF to transition away from market rate model of reimbursement to a cost of quality model of reimbursement. Everybody okay with that? Okay, move on to number 3. Consider the impact of benefit programs. Different subsidy streams should be braided so they are working together to support the parent and provider. And we have a comment to clarify and explain, and I do actually have more I can add on this from past meetings. I'll add in as a sticky note. Okay, I'll actually add it in a second. I'll just read it for now. When a parent's pay increases, the family's food and housing benefits decrease. DCYF and the child care subsidy need to be aware and mindful of the tiers so they know when families will lose housing or food benefits. As we think about child care subsidies, we need to consider how other benefit programs will be impacted. And then we have a story from a parent who shared at an ELAC meeting that they experienced the cliff effect and they were able to get subsidy for childcare, but then when they got a new job, they didn't qualify for childcare subsidy anymore, and they found themselves in between a rock and a hard place. It created an unsafe environment for kids and mental health, as well as the parents who try to be on time and present and have to find affordable childcare that accept their children, work with their work schedule, created behavioral problems for them for their child at school and care. And at work, the parent was reprimanded for being late or needing to leave to pick up their child. Yeah, so I think this is kind of about the cliff effect and a recommendation to try to have supports work for the parent, not lead them to a place where they're having to make a hard choice. So we have that context, but with that context, does anybody else have any other anything that they think could make this recommendation more specific or actionable, or any additional context you want to provide?
So it seems to me that this can go down 2 pathways, and I'm wondering what it is we want to address. I mean, there's the issue of a parent understanding when they will lose eligibility, so that it's super clear that when they take a job that they're going to lose the eligibility, and that is clear. So that's one pathway I go down. But also when I read this and listen to what you've just described, Emily, there's this other part of me that says, is this actually asking us to, the legislature to consider expanding access to have a softer landing? I think maybe you could go down both pathways. So I just want to bring up those, and maybe both pathways are important to address as part of this whole thing. That, parents are making choices for themselves so that they don't get surprised. And then on the flip side, there's this cliff effect and the need for expansion of the child care subsidy system to allow families to get to a point where they can really cover the full cost when they drop off the cliff. Just a couple of thoughts.
No, I think those are great points, Deanna. I can see that. What do you guys think? What do you want the recommendation to be? Thanks, Nicole. So we are on our last hour. We still have quite a few to get through, so I'm going to go to the next one. I will say at some point there might have to be a time where ELAC members kind of decide what to do with recommendations we didn't get to the specifics on. Just because I don't know if you guys want to keep doing these report development sessions or, finish up the legislative report so we can get to the legislator before the session starts. So I just want to keep that in mind. So maybe for some recommendations that there wasn't a lot of thought or understanding, maybe those we put on the back burner or on a list for you all to consider next year. So go to the next one for now. Increase the number of preschool programs at local public schools. This will help prepare kids for kindergarten and provide families with early access to all the resources and assistance that local public schools can provide. And this was a survey suggestion as well. So we have not had this recommendation in front of a group to talk about yet. So if there are any thoughts on that, there's also a comment in here. Suggested language, expand access to high quality early care and education, including at public schools. And I just saw your comment, Gary, about the last one. I'm going to add that real quick. Are there any thoughts about this? Does this feel like a recommendation that the group wants to make? There's also suggested language to edit it to make it maybe a little bit more clear. If you guys want to adapt that language in the orange sticky notes.
I think this is one of those issues that has a lot of tension. This is Gary again. A lot of folks in the childcare world feel like there's maybe been too much expansion of preschool into the K-12 system. So, but then those who are part of the K-12 system, I think, feel differently. And I don't know what the will or interest of the group is, but it'd be maybe good to get some sense.
I think maybe this I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Deanne.
I'm sorry, Debbie.
Okay.
I was just going to say maybe we say something on a sticky note that's about that tension, which is something like expand the number of preschool programs where other early learning programs are not available, or something that gives a nod to acknowledging the broader context within which the expansion happens, so that it really is about need. Because again, going back to my constant beating drum is we want children to have early learning experiences, and if that's working towards that end, that's a good thing. But the tension that exists is because sometimes those preschool programs get put in places where we already have a very rich early learning environment available.
I think the other thing that we recognize right now, until such a time when families are only paying 7% of their income, and until it's more profitable for centers and home, and the rules allow for centers and homes to make it easier to have more infant and toddler care. I think profit is a big part of that. That they're classrooms that are not as profitable as preschool classrooms, that the greatest lack of care is in the infant space. And so it's not, I don't think it's a school issue, but I don't know if we have that somewhere else in the list of things, but I think the real expansion that's needed is support for infants and toddlers.
Lon, you have your hand raised?
Yes, hi, thank you. I was just wanting to comment. I work in the Bellevue area, and so this was my comment because I see a lot of kids who come from the lower demographics, like low-income, refugee, immigrant families who cannot pay or sometimes can't afford other child care. So I've seen lots of improvement with kindergarten readiness for kids who enroll in these Bellevue School District preschool programs. So I just threw it in there, and I wanted the group to discuss it. But I also underappreciated the friction of private childcare providers, et cetera, on this topic. So I obviously don't know all the details.
Thank you, Milan. Heidi, to keep your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, Milan, because I was kind of wondering, I wanted a little bit more context, and that was helpful. The other thing, though, I think that we need to make sure that we look at is the verbiage that says this will help prepare kids for kindergarten. I think that somebody who didn't understand that context, that language can be a little problematic, because in my mind that insinuates that if they're getting care outside of a system that is set in a school, that they're not being prepared for kindergarten. And we know that there are many early learning, early learning places that they're coming from that are engaging in a lot of high quality learning and care. So I'm just wondering about that verbiage.
Yeah, and just to comment back, thanks Heidi for pointing that out. I did not mean it to, definitely did not mean it to say that other programs don't prepare children for kindergarten. I think I was just commenting anecdotally from my experience. But yeah, definitely feel free to edit the statement as much as needed.
I think Milan, she was talking about the statement, not what you said, how it read, how it read, not what you said. I think you added some helpful context, but I did add, this will help prepare kids for kindergarten and provide families with early access to all the resources, assistance that local public schools can provide in areas where high quality early learning is not accessible. Does that kind of, and I used accessible to kind of nod to what you were saying, Milan, that maybe in some areas where there is high quality early learning, some families can still benefit from pre-K in the school district setting.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that looks good. Thanks.
Emily, I would almost say where affordable high quality early learning is not accessible, maybe putting that in there.
Any other thoughts?
I'm trying to decide what to say. Because I think personally that to say that there's tension around this is very true, but maybe an understatement, especially in the early care and education field. And that even just the comment, I understand why you might want to put where affordable high quality is not available, but part of the unaffordability is the way the structure, the system is around early care and education. So I think that honestly, I mean, I like the fact that we're talking about where other services are not available, but what has happened has had a really negative impact on the early care and education field, and that schools are not held to the same requirements that we are in the field. And so somehow just to put a comment, like a statement out like this, is very disturbing to me, because we're not talking apples and apples here. And we're not talking, we don't have the same amount of money to pay staff. I mean, the requirements are not the same, the physical space. I mean, there's just like so many things. These are not two equal things in just different locations based on where's capacity exists. And so I think this is a very complex issue and very concerning one. And I think that there have already been, maybe unintended, I'll give you that, maybe that's true, but some negative consequences on the early care and education field. And then I'm just going to say that it is my personal belief that DCYF should be supporting and backing up early care and education and ECAP programs like ECAP and licensed childcare programs, because I'm just going to say it. I was so, I guess I'll just say, annoyed when I listened to an appropriations committee hearing where Ross Hunter and Chris Reichdahl and a representative from the governor's office all, what I would say, threw early learning and ECAP and childcare under the bus around this issue. And so it's my personal belief that DCYF and the leadership in DCYF should be supporting and helping move forward the programs that we've worked so hard to establish that are high quality. And that should not be negotiable in my mind. Even though we might want to forge other partnerships, and then even though there might be needs in communities across the state that have gaps and needs, and there are other, we need additional ways to fill those gaps. But that's, in my opinion, not what has happened. At least I'll speak for our region and from the people that I know from other parts of the state. So to me, this is very loaded, and we're not talking about the same things. And we are going to, well, anyway, I won't repeat myself. So that's all I have to say. I don't know how to put that in a sticky note, but I think this is a really big deal.
Yeah, I hear that.
And I think DCYF has no business not supporting the programs that are funded through DCYF and the leadership, not the people on this call, the leadership.
I hear that. I did try to take, oh, go ahead, Carrie, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that Ross Hunter and DCYF are in a difficult position because Ross is a direct hire by the governor. So I think the issue really lies with the governor and the governor's view of preschool and childcare versus OSPI offering those. And I think that's where our tension is convincing the governor, or in a year, a new governor, almost a year, a little over a year, a new governor, about that issue. So while I appreciate the frustration with DCYF and Ross Hunter, I think it's higher up the hierarchy, just so we're all aware of where that's coming from.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And at some point, we will have a new governor, I guess.
Can I just throw out there? Oh, sorry, Debbie, were you not done? Okay. I just want to throw out there that if we're going to have a recommendation along these lines, that first sentence should not be the first sentence at all. And I feel strongly that it should be around the funding streams and how they are utilized in our state in order to have parent choice really be an option to go to childcare centers, family homes, family friend neighbors, the local TK program, but just to say the increased number of preschool programs at local public schools, I adamantly do not feel that that should be a recommendation at all, because even though we've thrown in at the end about the areas that are underserved, people read the first sentence and then they stop and they just keep going. So I just feel like that first sentence is very misleading and should not be a recommendation, in my opinion. And everything Debbie said is spot on, 100%. I agree with, and that's it. Thank you so much. My opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, I hear that this is a very nuanced issue, and I have all of these comments in here. I think of the recommendations we are able to get through today, of the ones that come up as kind of maybe we're not getting consensus, we'll add those to part of the follow-up email, calling those recommendations out specifically, just to get a little more feedback, because we definitely want you guys all to feel like these recommendations are your recommendations and there to be some level of consensus. Even, if there's nuance and complexities, maybe that's something we push to having more deeper conversations about in the coming year, and not try to rush through to get it included in this report if we're not all feeling on the same page about it. So unless there are more thoughts on this, I think we might just kind of add it to the follow-up as any more thoughts about this? We might not include it in the report if there's not consensus. How does that sound to the group? Okay. And for sure, all of this will be in the minutes, the different views. I feel like actually I've just learned a lot about this issue from you guys sharing your sides. I felt a little like I didn't really understand it as deeply as I do now. So thank you for sharing. In the chat. All right. Next one. To measure and define stabilizing the early learning field, DCYF could analyze the rate of providers who are closing each month and track whether licensed providers have returned to pre-COVID enrollment levels. Some of this is tracked in the Fair Start for Kids Act report. DCYF doesn't look monthly, and we don't have the enrollment data, but a portion of this is tracked. And this was also a survey suggestion. So this is the first time it is in front of the group for a more robust discussion. Any thoughts on this recommendation?
Again, I wonder if we don't want to make this a little bit more actionable around what we're trying to do. I think what the underlying message here is that we have a clear understanding of the impact of why providers are exiting the field, as well as you know, what the impact is around the return to pre-COVID enrollment levels. The problem with enrollment levels, I don't know. It's so hard because we know what the license levels are, and it's harder to gather what people are actually enrolling at. I don't know. I'm just thinking about what we're trying to accomplish with this, which is a deeper understanding of what's happening in the field and what we need to be doing about it in terms of addressing the issues that are raised, rather than just doing, you know, that we want to better understand why people are exiting the field so that those issues can be considered and recommendations made or something like that. Maybe that I'm talking my thoughts out loud, sorry, to be a little jumbled.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you were just saying, and I'm thinking about providers that in my classes that were just talking about the fact that their licensing capacity is larger than what they can currently serve because they don't have staff. And they don't have staff because they can't find them, right?
Yeah, we found that in our region too, Thurston County up to the peninsula. We have several centers that can't find enough staff.
I will just also agree with that. I mean, we work with ESD 112 and provide staffing for all of their programs, ECAP and childcare and early Head Start. And we have month or weekly meetings on enrollment holds in those programs, all of them, because of the staffing situation. And you know, back to sort of the need to provide compensation that's equivalent to their counterparts with certain, you know, with the similar education requirements. I mean, we just have to do something to change that situation, as well as providing them with support and education that's needed to navigate the challenges in classrooms. But exactly the same issue. And it's, yeah, there is demand out there. We just can't fulfill it. We can't provide the staff.
As a related point, but going backwards a bit. So in the first section, I didn't see anything about compensation. So I went into the original Jamboard and tried to add a new 9th slide. I don't know if it's going to be in the revised version that you were working on, Emily. So if you could maybe at some point check to see if that got in there, because that's just Debbie's issue that she just brought up about compensation.
Yeah, where'd you add it to?
What the Jamboard that I had, I pulled it up and then tried to add a 9th slide.
Yes, okay, I see that. Yep.
Okay.
I'll add it to the one we're working on.
And I think it's important to point out, as I understand it, the capital gains tax that Colleen was talking about earlier was a vehicle for increasing compensation within the field, which is something we desperately need. So I just want to, I believe that's correct. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but that, I mean, the relationship between what we need and that capital gains tax is very significant.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing though this recommendation isn't actually, the way it's worded is not kind of accurately capturing what you guys are hoping to gain. because I hear from this underlying message, we have a clear understanding of the impacts of why providers are exiting the field, as well as the impact of the return to pre-COVID enrollment levels. That's kind of what we want the end goal to be, correct? Is that what I'm hearing? And then it's more, how do we get there is the question. Any thoughts on how to make the recommendation a little more pointed towards this end goal? Or does it make sense to have as a recommendation, or is it again something that is maybe a continued conversation for ELAC and DCYF?
I have a question for Deanne. Hey, Deanne, the work Sarah Kelly's doing to try to look at utilization, I guess, of space, and then so this is sort of a question and a comment both. So part of the issue is what are we looking at universally? So there's licensed childcare, and then there's ECAP, and there's Head Start, and then there's pre-K that's offered through like the Bezos Academy, and then new TK offered through school districts. And so there's an ever expanding places where kids are, and childcare is just one piece of that. And so I'm wondering if Deanne, if that's part of what Sarah's working on. I'm not quite sure that's in the full capacity of that research she's doing, and whether we can help inform this in some way.
We definitely are doing research on, the changing level of license capacity. And currently what we're finding is license capacity is very similar pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. But the real issue, the real underlying issue is exactly what Debbie and several others were bringing up, which is that there's capacity there, there's a classroom sitting there, but it's not getting utilized. And so I think the underlying question here is, what's really available versus what's licensed is really sort of where the challenge lays. And so we're trying to get at that through a survey methodology, is looking at how many classrooms would you open if you had enough staff, for example, or what other mitigating issues are actually coming up for you that are causing you to not be able to open classrooms or do what you need to do to operate.
Yeah, what do you think about a sticky note that says something along the lines of work with the child care aware system to help gather data?
Sure. Yeah, that makes good sense. And to really start to align some of the community voice that we are able to capture in a way that perhaps would inform the data that is coming from the more traditional systems, if you will.
And I think, like I mentioned, it's only part of the picture. But I think the department has a better sense of ECAP, for example, because they contract for slots, like with an ESD, and they know that they have, 68 slots, and that 66 are filled, and they're supposed to be, whatever. So I think they have better data on ECAP. I think the other gap though is the other systems, like Bezos or school districts. I don't think we have really good information on school districts from OSPI on what they're doing around TK.
Yeah,
but those might be pieces for a sticky note too, is to get a fuller picture incorporating TK and private programs.
I think some of the tension though also is the issue of expectations within ECAP and Head Start around kind of getting back to where we were pre-pandemic. And so there's can be a negative impact on the program if they're not able to hire staff and open those slots. They may lose them or go away. And so I think getting a grasp, whether that's through what you're doing, Deanne, or a grasp on, okay, and what if that were to happen, then what is the ultimate goal of that, or how do we rebuild the capacity again to actually serve those kids rather than just taking the slots away? Because I know that that conversation has been coming up too. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. I guess one more thing I'll just say to that, because I don't know that this is the intent behind it, but it's sort of like you guys aren't doing enough to get staff and get those slots filled. And yet we're doing everything we can possibly think of to open those classrooms and get the child in that. And so to just take them away, I don't know. I guess I don't understand that. How do we help, again, build the system out?
Any other thoughts on this recommendation? I think with all of your input there, I can do some wordsmithing on the recommendation, but I just want to check in if there are any other thoughts or. Eric, could you take over this screen share again for a second and start on the second Jamboard at number 6?
Yes, I can.
So much. I will be right back.
I'm gonna pull that up. One moment. That was part 3. On the second, I'm asking that as I'm hoping somebody can.
We're still on part 2, expanding
Part
access.
2.
We're on number 6.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Number 6. There we go. Okay. So the recommendation we have as of now, make data available on the amount of stabilization funds invested into each program type, broken down per license capacity, number of kids served, and by the number of early learning professionals employed at each learning facility. So this sounds in line with one of the previous recommendations that was related to updating a web page or creating a landing page, which would show some of this data. Perhaps maybe someone here in the group would like to expand a bit on this recommendation. Does this sound similar to the previous recommendation and that discussion of creating this type of information on some type of landing page in the DCYF website?
I think you're right, Eric, that this is related to that. And I also think this just gets at wanting the data accessible that shows that dollars were really not allotted based on these very important criteria. So for just plain simplicity's sake of example, there were more dollars given to a family home provider per child served than dollars given to a child care center per child served. And there is no, I'm forgetting the term right now. Childcare centers don't actually have the capacity or purchasing power to have that significant of decrease in costs. And in fact, in my opinion, childcare centers have exponential amount of overhead compared to a family home. So as I read this, I think it is just someone trying to get to that point. And you can pull that from the dashboards now, but I really think that the sentiment behind this is getting at the transparency that those dollars were not spent equitably and or dispersed equitably. And I think in our last recommendation around the grant review committee, that can incorporate, you know, this information.
Yeah.
Could you find a way to add that to the dashboard? I'm certain that you could. I mean, you could, if you had a little toggle that was like per child served dollar amount, you would see that staggering, you know, 5,000 versus $500 right there in front of your face. Just for clarity's sake, I just made up those numbers, so please don't quote me on that. I've done the math before. I've been frustrated by the math so many times I've forgotten the actual numbers, but as an example, that is what you would see on your screen if there were that toggle option.
Okay.
Colleen, I have a related question for you, maybe others who maybe have heard about this regionally. One of the things I've heard from people applying for the Department of Commerce facility grants is that, and this might be old, it might be that this was something that happened 2-3 years and more ago, and maybe the last couple of years it's gotten better because I haven't heard anything in the last year or so. But the issue was that the larger entities like the corporate childcare or school districts or other larger entities could apply for those grants and be successful, where the smaller single owner or maybe someone on a couple or 3 sites or a family childcare just didn't have the capacity to write either the same quality of grant, or maybe some other kinds of matching funds or whatever the issues were. Have you all heard about that with that particular funding source? And maybe that should be part of our grant conversation as well.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, Gary, and that's true of many grants. There is an equity issue when you're talking about opening up grants to large corporations and or those who have access to grant writers and can assign full-time staff to do this work versus a single childcare provider applying. And I think that's something that this grant review committee needs to really lean into the design of those programs. And I think ELAC should be aware, and I am suggesting this for a future meeting, that I believe DCYF, and I know this calendar invite is somewhere on my calendar and I could go find it, but DCYF and or Commerce or whoever, these entities are convening a group right now to talk about how grants and things like that are going forward, and to look for the supports that are needed so that childcare providers can actually access and then utilize these funds. And I will share with you all that I was invited to that meeting because of my role with Washington Communities for Children as the state policy and advocacy lead. Maybe unbeknownst to the person hosting it, that I was also a childcare provider, but I hopped onto that meeting with 50 some individuals who work in large organizations and are making decisions about how this stuff is done. And I was the only provider present. And I very quickly and abruptly said out loud in that meeting that I could not believe I was the only provider there, and that they were already doing the process wrong because they were already not including provider voice as they started to talk about what providers needed for supports. Thank you, goodbye. None of your providers, you don't know what I do all day long. You are already sending the train down the tracks and you are already causing harm. There was one meeting before I joined the group. I have been able to join one meeting since the group started, and there was one meeting hosted when I had no capacity and a conflict to join. But I think that ELAC needs to be aware of this work that's happening, and I think that we need to pause and reflect already on what's going on there. That's the exact problem with these things, is that you get organization level people with no lived experience making and predetermining things before they share it with the general public and with the end users. And we're just going to create another situation where there's problems again. Like I don't love this. I do not like chiming in right now and saying these people messed up and did a bad job. That doesn't feel good. I don't think the individuals who made these decisions did them with malice. I think they don't know what they don't know, and they're forgetting to engage people at the early stages of these processes, and we're going to continue to suffer the consequences of that in our field. And yeah, there's a whole lot more to that we could go into, but it's a huge issue, and these grants and all of those things are being affected because we aren't starting and doing the work well from the beginning.
Thank you for sharing, Colleen. I think you had made a lot of valid points that I see a lot of head nodding, including myself, that would agree with some of those references. In relation to this specific recommendation, again, I think this should be moved to the topic of the grant review committee, which especially since Nicole was here for that, I think that we will have an opportunity to continue that conversation forward. And ideally, just starting the conversation earlier before that train is sent down the track. I think, Colleen, you nailed it. That's kind of really what I'm guessing you all are looking at wanting to see here, is when there is a grant or the funds are out and available, that you really want to be able to feel more inclusive in the grant process by identifying and being communicated to earlier in the process, and then being able to provide some guidance into that, because you all are the ones that are truly being affected by these processes. So with that, then I'll move this item, or we will move this item to that other recommendation. If everyone's comfortable with that, I will move forward to the next recommendation, unless anyone has anything further to add. Okay. And our next recommendation, we are in recommendation 7, still in part 2. Qualitative data should be included. The why needs to be part of the process to determine where and what resources are needed. Now, that seems very vague to me. I'm hoping someone here that possibly made that recommendation could provide a little more context.
I didn't place this, but it sounds similar to things I've heard. So maybe people can let me know if this resonates. Oftentimes there's data of, we have 40 kids unserved in this community, and so we'll start up a new blank, and without knowing more information about those 40 children, do we know whether they're from families that would benefit from, if they're income eligible for ECAP, and families would benefit from having a home component to the services? Do we know whether they can afford childcare? Do we know what, just all kinds of demographic information about the families and their needs? So without knowing that, just having the numbers, the quantitative data of gaps isn't necessarily the why. It's not the why.
Mm-hmm.
Pauline put some comments in the chat about the State of Children's report and the stories that they highlight. Help. Everyone's writing notes. You want to take over? I'll stop doing this.
Okay. So then maybe what you're all looking for is when, and this is a general sense, and I am paraphrasing here, so please forgive me if I'm off on this. But when DCYF is using data, whether it's related to grants and the final results, or the who received the grants, or enrollment levels, whatnot, but instead of, rather than just looking, say, at quantitative data, that it's really important for DCYF to incorporate qualitative data into a lot of these decisions and recommendations. Does that sound a little closer to what the group is?
And I guess I should add, I don't think it's just adding qualitative data. I think it's about what quantitative data you have. So if you don't have data on income eligibility, you don't have data on language, you don't have your home language, you don't have data on a lot of other things. So some of that could be quantitative, but just maybe isn't collected. So I think it's both.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe when DCYF uses, and we might have to reword this, so forgive me for this not sounding very eloquent. When DCYF uses data, it is important that both quantitative and qualitative data are included. The second part confuses me a little bit. The why needs to be part of the process to determine where and what resources are needed. Does anyone understand that statement? I probably should be the one that understands it.
I'm wondering if that goes back to a little bit of what a couple of people have been bringing up, which is, so yeah, you pushed all of the equity grants out the door, but did you look at who it ended up receiving them and ask that deeper question of why were these particular ones? Is there a commonality amongst everybody who got those grants because perhaps they have a grant writer or have more capacity? So I'm wondering if this isn't pushing DCYF to ask more questions and have more curiosity about what is actually happening, rather than reporting it just at face value. We were able to give 115 grants to, that it goes to that deeper question of, does this actually reflect the communities that are across the state? Does that suggest that we need to do something to make things more accessible, which gets more to that qualitative asking questions about who didn't get in as much as who did get in.
And I think it also, just a little bit expansion of that, goes back to what Colleen was saying, was that using equity grants, again, if a group of bureaucrats are coming together and saying, oh, we need to have these 4 things available as part of our equity grants, and people who are in the field working with children from diverse backgrounds say, oh, those aren't the right 4 things, we needed these other 4 things. So the why was missed maybe in the development of the grant itself.
Yeah, I think I got the gist of what it is you all are saying here. Obviously related around with data. I don't know if this necessarily fits in a recommendation like this, because this really is obviously this is a recommendation report from you all to the legislature. DCYF, of course, does use data both quantitatively and qualitatively, but perhaps it's the analysis and the communication that potentially is lacking in how we're using that, both sets of those data. Again, we don't necessarily use them both in all situations, but I do know that they have a lot of that and do use that at a deeper level. Would this be a little more appropriate as a follow-up topic with ELAC at a future meeting, as opposed to being listed here on this recommendation report, or are you all really wanting this to be part of this recommendation report?
Pauline, are you in a spot where you can come off mute and talk about that again, or I think maybe she's away from the call right now because she.
Yeah.
Oh no, she's good.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Eric. Can you say what you were saying again? I had
to answer. Sure. Yes. So is this particular recommendation, would it be more appropriate for us to include this as a feedback item for say the next ELAC meeting or a future topic where we really can, I think, get into the solutions and identify the pain point a little more clearly? Or do you think this recommendation should stay on this report? And, again, it's pretty general. It doesn't have a lot of teeth to it. I don't really know if it's going to really do much because there's just nothing behind it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't know if you've seen the language that Deanne put in the chat, and I read what Deanne put in the chat as something as language that could replace what is written on the screen here. Maybe that is not what Deanne's intention of it was, but I think it stands alone better than what is typed up on the screen, in my opinion. But I also understand, I mean, and we're not a full group of ELAC, so there's obviously value in holding off and bringing this to a larger discussion. So I mean, I defer to everybody else on how they're feeling about it. Besides that, I did appreciate the language Deanne provided there.
Yeah, actually, that change does make this feel a little like it fits better.
My intention was to use it as replacement. So Colleen, I was more making a recommendation. So thank you.
Okay, good. So now the recommendation as it stands, ensure that reports and data that is shared with the community include both qualitative and quantitative data to provide a clear picture of what is happening. I don't think that needs much more explanation, honestly. I mean, I think that's pretty clear what it is that you're asking the legislature to do and DCYF to do and how to use data. Does anyone have anything more to add to that?
The only thing I want to throw in is having the word "that" in that comment maybe needs to not be in there, because I think that part of the point of this was that the reports and data is shared with the community and not just remain internal documents.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I just kind of remember this conversation from previous, and I thought it had to do with like the Fair Start for Kids report that was going to remain an internal document had providers not spoken up and said this needs to go to other places.
Yes, actually, now that I put my AP hat on here, that was a very passive statement. So I have removed those, and I believe now we have active voice. So ensure reports and data is shared with the community, or ensure reports and data is shared with the community, include both qualitative and quantitative data to provide a clear picture of what is happening. Yeah, good. Excellent. Way to go. That's a fantastic edit. Okay. Anyone have anything further to add to this recommendation? Okay. Now we do have, I think, about 10 minutes left. I think we're just scheduled to go to noon. I don't know if there has been an identified path forward for how to get through these, the second half of these recommendations. Maybe rather than diving into this particular recommendation, it might be more appropriate for us all to identify how we can get through this still, and maybe spend the last 10 minutes really defining a better path forward. And I don't know, Emily, if you're back, or, oh, good, you are back.
I'm here. I will be off camera for the last 10 minutes, so I apologize for that. But I think that is probably a good idea, Eric, because at this time we don't have any additional report development sessions scheduled. You of course have an ELAC meeting October 3rd, and I think there's an hour of the executive session that we can have to work on this. But that will definitely not be enough time. We still have 20 recommendations to go through. So yeah, I do think it's a good time to check in on how to work through those. We can definitely send out the jam boards with the follow-up email for those who weren't able to attend today and for the jam boards we didn't get through. I will say we don't typically get a lot of feedback when we do leave the jam boards
Right.
open, which I totally understand you all are busy. I'm just we will definitely do that. I just don't feel confident that doing that will get us to where we need to be to get through the rest of the recommendations. Unless you all feel differently, that maybe you do have the capacity or an idea about how to do that or support you guys in doing that.
How many more did you say? 20?
Yes.
Mhm.
Actually there's 8, 9, 10. So there's 3 on this. This is actually 23. There's 19 in part 3 and 1 in part 4.
I just am thinking what I hate is when you go through things in order, you end up maybe having the most important thing that you miss. So I'm wondering if it might not be worth it to prioritize those, maybe send out a way to vote to see which ones are the top ones in people's minds of those remaining, so that we at least get to those in a collective conversation. I know going to a jam board like this is really tough to work my way through something like this. Even though clearly I talk far too much at the meeting, I have opinions, but sorry about that. But yeah, I wonder if what we might not want to do is cull down to the top issues that we can cover in an hour and a half so that we get them done.
You mean at the October 3rd ELAC meeting?
In advance of that meeting, actually have a vote that prioritizes what.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and then you come back with the ones that got the top votes as the ones that we'll work on as a group, and then leave the others to a jam board session. Okay. I'm just trying to prioritize.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart.
Feels to everybody else.
So
when must feel good. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, when does all this have to be finalized?
We no longer have a date because technically the end of August, early September, but we were able to get an extension. But when we ask for an extension, they don't say like, okay, here's your new date. They just say, okay, we know you're working on it and that you'll get it to us when you can. What we have been told is that the sooner we get it in, the more chance there is of legislators actually being able to do something with it. So I do feel that rush just a little bit, but I also, I don't want to rush these through just because of that. I want you guys to feel good about the recommendations you've made. Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add, if it's going to be part of the DCYF decision packages, I know that they often have deadlines for when those have to get into the governor's office. So I don't know if there's any extension on those as well, but if not, that should maybe drive the timeline as well. And I think that's typically right around now, if it's not, I mean, I don't think they go much past September.
Yeah, DCYF has already been working on the decision packages and agency request legislation. There's actually a webinar happening next Thursday that Allison Kretzinger is doing to talk about decision packages and agency request legislation for the 2024 session. I'm so sorry about my son. He's making a lot of noise back there. But yeah, that work has already starting and on its way.
I can go ahead and throw in the chat, excuse me, for those of you that weren't aware, this is the external invite for the webinar that Emily was just referring to.
Might it be possible to send out a doodle poll for maybe the week after next to see what would work for people for a meeting, and then just try to get this done as quickly as we can? But probably, I'm guessing maybe next week is a little bit too soon to try to schedule everybody.
Yeah, we can do that. We would want to work with, we would want to check in just real quickly with Lois and Enrica, just on their thoughts on that. But if they're good with doing a doodle poll and trying to schedule one more report development session before the 3rd, I think that that's something on our end we can do our best to facilitate.
Yeah, I think if you all are available and have the time, then most of the bones have been set up by Emily. So, those other jam boards are open, the slides are there, and we could fairly efficiently, I think, work through those last recommendations, especially after identifying what would be the highest recommended. What's the most important of those remaining items to you all? So then in summary, we will communicate with Lois and Enrica and just clarify that using a survey to identify both, I guess, time when you all can meet again, and then or another survey or the same survey looking at trying to rank some of these remaining items if need be, or maybe at the next report development, that's when you rank them. I'll think maybe I could just leave that open to the group and see if you have any preference.
If we could rank them before our next meeting, I think that would be good.
Okay.
Personally, I don't know if we can get it turned around that fast, but
Yeah, okay.
that's my personal opinion. I don't know.
I think we could do that. We could create a survey and get it turned around. I do think what we'll try to do with this follow-up email, we typically try to include the minutes in the follow-up email, which sometimes makes the follow-up email go a little bit later. We probably will not include the minutes with the follow-up email at first, just so we can get it out as soon as possible with the jam boards and the doodle poll and the recommendation prioritization survey. But we'll send the minutes out when we have them too. But I think we can do it, Nancy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, well, Emily, you probably want me to close this out since you've got a young one there who's wide awake, or maybe you'd like to close this out for us. How does everyone feel about where we're at, how we've gotten here today, and I think maybe most importantly, our path forward? I believe we have some clarity on how we're going to be able to finish this up, and I think do it in the right way and not try to rush this and just ram it through, because then it's like, what's the point? It's just going through the exercise. So I think I applaud you all for really wanting to do this properly, do this effectively, but at the same time recognizing the timeliness of it all and being able to work with us to kind of help connect these two. So anyone have anything to share here at the end? No? Okay, well, wow, you've all hung in here for a good solid 3 hours with, I don't think we took a break, did we? We just kind of kept going through. Okay, well then we have some follow-up on our end that we will get out to you all very, very quickly. We do appreciate your time. Those jam boards, if you do have the links, they are still open. Please do feel free. If after this you want to go spend some more time in them and look a little forward on some of them, that would be great. We would definitely appreciate that. Otherwise, we bid you all farewell for the day, and we will follow up very, very soon and see you October 3rd, if not sooner. Thank you. Bye-bye.